This is our 10th installment of Worldview and Apologetics, and we've been talking about the second section of this Worldview class. In this second section, we did talk about the foundations of a worldview through the first 5 classes, and then elements of the Christian worldview we're finishing up tonight. We spoke through these 5 sections that God is personal, triune, and sovereign. We then talked about the fact that human beings are made in His image, not triune and not sovereign, but we're made in His image in so many ways. Number 3, we talked about the fact that Sterling talked about sin and the fall, that we started at a certain spot, fell from that spot, and that's where we are at this time. And then Dean talked about the creation, God's good world. And tonight we're talking about redemption and restoration. After this, we'll begin our third section. The third section will be competing worldviews. We'll talk about all the different world religions and how they're impacted by some of the things we've talked about, where they stand on certain ideas and what has impacted their worldview. And then we'll talk about apologetics for the last half of the class. And that's going to be something I think it's going to be very important to us. Redemption and restoration. Those words bring up some things in everyone's mind. And if you just think about redemption, and you think about that thought, all kinds of things might come to your mind. I think about some words from Tim Keller, and I'll just read this. The word redemption stirs something in us. Even in everyday life, it's a term that pulls at our hearts, used to describe comebacks, homecomings, and stories where things are finally set right. Isn't that what you think about when you think about redemption? Finally, someone gets their comeuppance, right? The villain at the end of the story gets put in jail. The hero wins the ball game. It's even sweeter when we experience it ourselves, when what was lost is recovered, what was broken is restored, and when justice or vindication prevails. And you think about it just in classic stories. Someone give me an idea of a classic book that has the redemption story as its very foundation.
Redeeming Love.
Redeeming Love. There's the name and the title. Okay? Anybody else? I'll throw some out there just to kind of prick your minds and think about it. Homer's Odyssey. Odysseus was going through his journeys, and it's a crazy tale with a lot of interesting things in the storytelling, but he restores his home and his family and redeems them back to himself. Think about Crime and Punishment. Dostoevsky's title, his very long book I had to read a long time ago about Rodion, the law student who murders someone and eventually is brought back into a emotional relationship with God, basically, because of a faithful Christian companion of his. Count of Monte Cristo, Dumas' famous novel. Again, the story of Dantes who has to be redeemed, and he is, after being wrongfully imprisoned. And then Les Miserables, of course, redemption by that whole story is about redemption. In our classic fairy tales, think about the stories your kids watch. Every single one of them. Snow White, Cinderella, Wizard of Oz, Beauty and the Beast. What's the beginning of the Beauty and the Beast, the tune? The tale is old as time, right? The story of Beauty and the Beast is all about redemption, and it's as old as time. So all these stories harken back to something that is basic and intrinsic in what God has done for us. In movies, I'll throw all these up there, think about them. They talk about, Adrian for Rocky, and Adrian's asking him, Rocky, why is it so important you want to go the distance? And it seems like the movies are about going the distance, right? Perseverance, and if you work at it hard enough and you're strong enough, you can overcome. But really, it's more about what's behind that. What is Rocky trying to do to redeem himself? What is he trying to do to give his life meaning? And all 7 movies, it's the same thing over and over again, just different flavors thrown in there, right? Shawshank Redemption. There's about 3 different storylines of redemption happening in that movie. My favorite, Groundhog Day. Every day is redemption for Bill Murray, right? He's trying to get it right and finally does. Schindler's List. This famous businessman who has a factory, he kind of recruits these Jewish slaves for his factory work, and then he comes to a realization that this is a problem ethically and morally. And then he goes and tries to make that right for the people. And It's a Wonderful Life, of course. Think about all the redemption lines going through that story. Of course, George Bailey, he has to be redeemed, but think about it. You know, Mr. Potter is trying to be redeemed during that. Clarence the angel is trying to get his redemption, to get his wings, right? So all these stories of redemption are taking place. And if you think about it, all these movies that really prick us in the heart and why these are on this list and why people see them over and over, because they tell the redemption story. And that just flips a switch right here, okay? So if we're thinking about the word redemption, it stirs something in us. And why is that? That's my question for you. Any ideas?
Gives you hope.
Gives you hope. Good.
We all need it.
We all need it. It's a universal thing because all of us have what? Romans 3:23. Fallen short of the glory of God. All of us have. And we all recognize that. We've all messed up. Even people that aren't spiritually minded know they've messed up. They know they've made mistakes. They know they've fallen from what they thought they should be doing. So it's a universal condition that we're all in, that we're going, we're in this bad place, and we got to have something to do about that. What else? Any other ideas?
Maybe it's inherent within us to get back that which was lost, and we feel incomplete, like the status quo isn't what we see as our final, final status.
Good. Excellent. And that idea of having a God-shaped hole in our hearts that's been discussed, that we have to fill that with something, I think that goes intrinsically back to Adam and Eve, the fact that we were taken out of the garden and we find ourselves in this situation. One of my favorite authors, John MacArthur, says, redemption is what we long for at the end of every story. We long for it because it's intrinsic to us. It's something that we're drawn to, not because of the storytelling, but because of the satisfying resolution. It makes things right, and everything that went wrong is made right. But mostly, this is something Tim Keller said, we ache for this kind of story because, as you mentioned, we were made for it. We were made for it. God put it in our hearts. He created us to long for redemption with Him. We all have a piece of it. The most vile person you can think of and that you might know in your daily walk has a longing for a connection with God. And that's something we have to remember. Every soul has a longing for connection back to God. So what exactly is redemption? Well, let's talk about some things that's not exactly. And that might help us to get a better idea of what God's talking about when He talks about redemption. There's a lot of things that a lot of different words we could throw in there that are similar to redemption. Can you think of some of those words, those concepts? Tonight's lesson is about redemption and restoration, so that's one of those words. How about another one? Some Bible terms we might not use every day. Some might be legal terms. We'll go through some here. Reparations, okay. Justice or justification, okay. All right. What's that? Reconciliation. Excellent. Thank you, Luke. So, redemption and restoration, we'll start with that one. Redemption has to do with, yes, all the things we're going to mention are part of redemption, but there are little different flavors of it. And we've put all these together, they're going to give us the idea of what God wants us to know about redemption to Him. So, restoration is returning something to its former state. Okay, former state. And the example I heard tell was someone had built a car, taken an old car and restored it to a wonderful shape, back to the shape that it used to be back in 1947. Another example was someone said they had a nice car, a brand new car, but somebody, their enemy, stole it and treated it badly and just tore it all up. The person who wanted that car back sought to redeem it, which would be what? Well, the redemption part would be to get out their wallet and pay the guy what he wants to get the car back, still in a junky state, and then he takes the time to restore it to its previous state. So redemption is the buying back part without the restoration, and the restoration is the idea of getting it back to where it was before. So redemption involves some kind of transaction. You're giving something away to get something back. And usually, think about the old S&H green stamps. Little squares of green paper that those of you that are younger than 35 have no idea what I'm talking about. When you went to the store, they gave you S&H green stamps. They looked like postage stamps. And when you purchased a loaf of bread, you got a stamp for that. And you kept a book. And my grandma would put the stamps in there, and they'd build up over time, and the book would get thicker and thicker and thicker. And after a certain number of weeks, you could go back to the store and you could turn in those green stamps. You could redeem them for groceries or something else. But the actual value of those little green stamps was not much. And the book was really basically worthless, except it could be redeemed for something much more valuable. So intrinsic in the idea of redemption is we're turning something in for something much more valuable. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, because we're going to jump ahead and talk about our Redeemer, Christ my Redeemer. Does that hold true when we're talking about the death and the blood of our Savior being shed for us? Is that less valuable than that which is redeemed? Think about that. Because I think in God's eyes, what he's saying is, you and you and you and you and you are so valuable to me that I'm giving up my son. You are way up here. Not because of anything we've done, but because of who we are. We're his created beings. And he's made that transaction for us because of it. Another word that comes up is rescue. What does rescue bring to mind? If you have small children or grandchildren, you think about Paw Patrol. They're the rescue dogs, right? They're the rescuers. That focuses on deliverance from harm or injury. And redemption includes rescue, but it adds the idea of the cost. And rescue is, the rescuer doesn't come up and say, have you got a 5? Did you bring your checkbook to this accident? Justification, we talked about that word that came up, and that's simply the declaration of righteousness. It's saying, I am declaring that this is righteous. And God is the only one that can do that, right? God is the ultimate rightness. He's the only one that can declare that something has been, is right. And then another word that comes about is the word absolution. We don't use that word too often, but absolution is similar. It again is part of the redemption process, but it's a bit different. And that's a declaration of not righteousness, but forgiveness. It's saying you have been forgiven of this. These are just little shades of meaning. Put them all together to get the idea of redemption. And then another one that's a little bit, we could talk about this a long time, but I won't. Vindication. We will talk about this last one, atonement. Someone tell me what atonement is, because sometimes that's using the same phrase as redemption. What's that?
Atonement is a price that we pay.
Okay. It is a price that we pay. That sounds a lot like redemption. Does it differ? Can you think of ways in which it differs? Let's go back to where the word comes from. if you think about it. And it's referenced if you think about where it's really referenced from back in Leviticus 16. The atonement, the Day of Atonement. That's what 16 is all about. And all the things that happen with the Day of Atonement. It's a one time a year in which the high priest enters the most holy place, the only time, enter the most holy place, and blood is sacrificed twice, both for himself and then as a representation toward God. But before that, he's covered in incense to cover his sins before he goes in. So it's becoming at one with God is the idea. At one with God. And it's represented by, if you recall, the Ark of the Covenant, Ark of the Testimony had the seat, sometimes called the what? Mercy seat. And that seat, the word in Hebrew just meant cover, because it was an empty container, this tabernacle. And the cover that went over that was made of solid gold, a huge hunk of gold to cover that